Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Human Narratives. This is your girl, Dorinda, and today it is a pleasure. It is a true pleasure to say that I have a good friend of mine that is also joining me as part of the podcast. And please introduce yourself.
Hi,
Welcome.
I'm Mary, and like Dorinda said, we are good friends, and I'm excited about today's topic. So,
Yes. So, you know, I received a topic suggestions, and one of the topic that was recommended that we talked about on the podcast today was how much is too much sex, right? So I understand that that is a topic that is most likely discussed across many different homes,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
Whether you're married or whether
Right.
you're single or whether you're with someone dating or a situation, whatever your
Situationship.
circumstances
Yeah.
of your situationship correct is, right? Sex is always going to be a discussion.
Yes.
So a lot of times that can also be an issue in relationships if there is disconnect between how much someone needs or feel like they want from that person versus how much the other person is willing to provide
Absolutely.
in that relationship. So what is your take on that?
Well, I think I'm gonna start off with something you said was, you know, about how much is too much per the sex. It's not just how much is too much sex, it's how much is too much sex per the sex.
Right.
So male, female, like we have our different takes, and we have to be able to be in tune with what each other has to say.
Yeah.
But even there's an age old thing that goes back to even having the best sex and making a decision about sex, and that's communication.
Ooh, you hit it. Yes. Why is communication so pertinent or important, especially when you're talking about sex?
Communication is important because, I mean, how do I know what you need or what you want and how much of it you need and want if I don't communicate? The
Right.
problem with, but there is also problems within communication itself, because sometimes we communicate with our partner, whatever in whatever situation we in, but we don't listen to respond to what they're saying. We listen to respond instead of listening to hear them.
Okay.
And then we end up not connecting because the way you're giving it to me, communication, may not be the way I receive it.
Okay.
So there's hidden little innuendos in between just the word communication.
Right.
Like, Dorinda, I have no idea what type of wine you like if I don't ask you.
Correct.
And if I say, well, Dorinda, I'm visiting with you today and I want to bring you a bottle of wine. And you say, oh, I love blank. And I show up with something else.
Okay.
Sex it has to be communicated. And sometimes we have to even look at the verbal versus the nonverbal.
So you're saying what I'm also hearing is not just the verbal aspect of communicating, there's also the nonverbal aspect of what the other person is trying to communicate with you. Are you also paying attention to those cues? Right?
Because our bodies are there, it's always calling for something, right?
Correct.
So
yearning for that love.
Yes.
Right?
And to you in your relationship, it might look like sitting on the sofa with a blanket around us, having an intimate, just having a conversation, growing intimacy. And to him, it may look like just jumping your bones and forgetting about any of that.
Correct.
Because that's what they need. But how do you know what each other need if you don't communicate that? And so we get so it gets lost in translation, and then the question of how much sex is too much sex gets put on the back burner because now you don't even want to have sex because you can't communicate.
Okay, I see where you're going. You tend to determine how much the other person needs when it comes to sexual satisfaction if there's better communication, right? And you get to understand whether it's a number or maybe just a connection time that person may need, right? I need to have sex 3 or 4 times a week? Is it a number for your partner? Or is it a connection time for the other person where it's just sitting under a blanket with some popcorn and some movies and we are caressing, and that's sex for that individual, romance, right? It doesn't have to be actual physical for it to say or for it to count.
And you have to remember that in a woman's mind, the sex is secondary to the intimacy.
Okay.
So we're trying to get something different.
Okay.
Now it's not every woman. Some women are just on that same way. Let's hit it and quit it. And I don't have time for the hugging and the caressing and all of that. Okay. I'm not saying that women aren't that way.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, if you're in a partnership and you don't feel, you haven't communicated exactly what it is I'm trying to get out of this situation right now. I'm just trying to grow some intimacy.
Right.
Though you might be thinking intimacy, and he might just be thinking, "Can we put this popcorn to the side and get to it?"
Right. Right.
So before we can think about how much sex is too much sex, we have to establish a connection. Now, there have been times.
Okay.
There's known to have been times where, at first sight,
there's no communication.
There's no communication.
Okay.
It can be
right.
It's chemistry. Now we didn't jump from
it's chemistry or lust, right? Sometimes it's not chemistry. Right. Sometimes it's chemistry, but then sometimes you have to include lust in it, because once that interaction or whatever is done, it's done.
I'm looking forward to that topic.
It's done, right? Yeah.
So, but how much sex, Dorinda, is too much sex?
I mean, I think that, like you said, it all depends on communication, but also the desire of the individuals that are involved in the relationship, right? But you brought up like a lot of great points about the challenges, or the importance of communication, really. But how can one break that challenge or barriers around communication to be able to get to that piece of, hey, this is how much I want, or this is what my needs are when it comes to sex or romance in a relationship? How do we break those barriers? Besides just communicating, because sometimes you may have a partner who may not be a communicator, right? They may not want to be vulnerable. A lot of times it's really hard for men or even women, right, to be vulnerable because of life experiences. So how do we break those barriers without communication and still be able to get to that space to be able to say, okay, baby, I want it 3-4 times a week and I can give it to you?
Honestly, Dorinda, I think you just have to do it.
Okay.
You just have to.
So how do you do it?
You just have to. This is what I need.
Okay.
I need sex 3 or 4 times a week.
Okay. So you're saying you just communicate it directly to the person.
Because sometimes overthinking.
Okay.
I have an overthinking sweatshirt. I should have wore that. I'm an overthinker. Sometimes overthinking it's too much. Like, so the breakdown has to start in the individual.
Okay.
I have to start seeing my partner as somebody that I can just say, look, this is what I need.
Right. Okay.
I don't need that extra stuff.
Okay.
I don't need the fluff I don't need that. I need to have sex 3 times a week.
Okay.
4 times a week. I'll take it. I'll work with you, whatever. So it's got to be open. But like you said, the vulnerability stops us from just coming out and telling.
Correct.
So, but that just goes back to saying, you can't, if I met you on the premises of sex,
right?
And that was probably in the beginning, because in the beginning that's all we're doing, right? Bunch of sex.
Correct.
Over time, the reason why that amount of sex that we had in the beginning doesn't work anymore is because we don't have the intimacy, we don't have the connection, we don't have
that was never created in the beginning.
So I think it's important for people to know in the beginning, just do it, just say it.
Okay. I think so not just saying it, but also being able to understand what the other person is going through too, right? Is that other person able to provide that need for you, that 5, 4, 3 times a week, right? And if so, what can you do as a partner to bring that part up from out of that person,
You know,
right?
it just hit me that
How can you bring that beast out of that person, or how can you bring that emotions out of that person to get that person to be able to be available in such a way for you?
that's that one another tricky thing, right? Because we want like to believe that there's honesty from the jump, right?
Correct.
Which it's not always so. But if I'm not telling you
Right.
with this,
I don't know.
some type of way I'm telling you.
Okay.
So if every day you're coming home from work and your partner is jumping your bones and not hearing about your day and he's telling you
that's all he wants.
that's all I need.
Right. Okay.
I need, you know.
So that's the nonverbal cues that we talked about earlier.
But we have to pay attention to it. We have to pay attention because, like you said, when people are vulnerable, when we're vulnerable, we don't always use our words.
Correct.
But we always use our bodies. We always use our facial expressions. We always use, and so now it becomes a game of, am I even paying attention to my significant other's reaction when I just jump their bones when they walk in the door? And I wish I had another term besides jump their bones.
Hey, if you need to jump the bone, you jump the bone. Right.
Well, sometimes jumping the bone leads to jumping the broom.
And a whole lot of other jumping, right? Right. It may not always lead to jumping the broom, but it may lead to some exciting jumping. So
let's talk about not what are there there's some studies out there, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Some studies that say a man needs this much or a woman needs this much, or you were
sharing that story with me earlier. Please.
So according to somebody that I've had a conversation with, that because like we talked about, sex is an ongoing topic across many different situationships, friendships, whatever.
Right.
And I was told that men should have at least 21 orgasms a month in order for them to stay in a clear mental space.
Okay, 21. Okay. That's almost half of the whole month, but okay. Yeah.
So then we were talking about, and I was saying, does that mean 21 days or just 21 bang, bang, bangs and wham, bang, bang,
right. Yeah. Okay.
Because, but in the beginning stages, 21 is nothing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, to some couples.
Mm-hmm.
To some
right.
people.
It's nothing. Right.
To some people, it's not. But that's what I want. I'm wondering, do they just need 21 times a month, or is that I would say just 21 times a month.
21 times a month. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think the man cares if it's the same day.
I mean, I think
day
so. I think that it's not per session. I think it's per daily.
Okay.
Honestly, I do not think that a man would count a session as part of that 21, because who would do that? Anyone would want to be able to have that opportunity multiple times,
right,
throughout the month, right? So if I can do it more days, why not?
Or if I can do it more times
a day, why not?
Yeah.
And women too, right? It will be interesting to see how many times a month the research studied.
Unfortunately, I don't have the female.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I think I'm gonna have to do some more looking into that. And I'm not this and the source of the information I got is not like some sex experts or whatever. It's just like reading into other material.
Of course.
But if it's coming from a man,
right,
then if he says 21 times, but at what point in your relationship do you walk to, you've been with somebody for 15 years, and the last 5 you've been getting probably 21 times a year.
Oh, 21 times a year.
So you might be a little bagged up.
Okay. Yeah, that.
And now you
Yeah.
have to come and present this new information and be like, I'm supposed to have sex 21 times a
Oh.
month.
But I think, a lot of times what I've seen, even in our work of practice, when we work with couples, a lot of times is where the man is asking for more sex. I've had situations where it's the woman as well, but I think what I normally encourage is to meet each other at a compromising point, right? Be able to understand what is on your spouse's plate, on your partner's plate, right? Even if those are the things that you used to do when you first got together in the honeymoon stage, it's still doable, right? But you also have to understand a lot has changed. Maybe you guys have children, or you have jobs, you have, other responsibilities, life,
Or
right?
maybe that ugly little two words, erectile dysfunction, creeps in.
Erectile dysfunction. The body does what the body does, so you have to be able to meet your partner where they are, and to support them sexually and in an intimate way, from that standpoint. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's easy for me to say now because I've been married for so long. It's easy for me to it's easy for me to say. Doesn't mean it's still easy for it to even do it.
Okay.
Or but it's easier for me to say now what I believe should happen and how things should take place, to communicate how many times a month you need to have sex.
Okay.
But even in 23 years, I can say it's still a struggle sometimes with that. And I don't know that my partner has realized how many times a month he needs to be sex to be okay, because sex is something he thinks about all the time. I don't think you can put a number on it.
Right.
But for me, it's important for me to communicate, but I can communicate all day long. It doesn't mean that you're going to hear me. It doesn't mean that you're taking it in. So sometimes it just gets to the point where you have to just bite the bullet and maybe he starts taking care of himself. And And then you have to consider, how do I feel about him taking care of himself? Because I can't provide 21 times a month, or I can't provide 30 times a month if that's what he requires. Because just because some numbers say 21, some men require it every day.
Right. 4 times a day. Yes. I mean, there are stories we've seen even in social, in our own, personal, or even in entertainment, where men and women have spoke about how many times they feel like they need to be able to relieve themselves, right?
I'm thinking, I don't know that this isn't something we can dive into right now, but I'm thinking about the why.
The why into
why
the desires
so many times.
Okay.
Like, is it because our bodies won't function if we don't get, is that a part of its excessive lubricating itself, or I don't know, but it's the why. Like, sometimes we have to know why. We don't have to know, but it's like this. Why does he need 21 times a month? Why does he? And remember, that runs us right into, especially if we're still in fertilization days. So 21 times a month, and we got to take in consideration, we got 7 days that we could
be out of commission. Okay.
Right. And so that takes us into how many days? 28 days?
I think that, like I said, it's not just the high sex drive doesn't only fall on the male, part. It also falls on the woman part, right? And you may also ask that question: why may a woman want that sexual desire 21 or 30 times a month? And they also go through the, those period days.
I really don't want to get stuck on how many days. I mean, I know I am stuck there, but I was just thinking, like, not getting stuck on the days, because we desire different things. Yes. Like, a man across the board, like, if you do a poll, men are always going to come out with. I'm going to say always, that's biased.
Yes.
That's my opinion. But it's always, how many men do you encounter that need intimacy over sex?
Intimacy over sex.
Some of them just need sex.
Yeah.
Intimacy doesn't factor into that for what they need.
Okay.
But then how vulnerable are your partner gonna be if all I need is that to be okay for the month, and my significant other needs intimacy.
Right. And I'm not providing that intimacy for that person
because I'm so focused on my need.
Right.
To have sex.
Right. And I think sometimes that also what interfere with the relationship, right? Mm-hmm. Where a relationship may not last. There may be connection and sparks and all of those things, but one of the big part is sex, communication, finance. Mm-hmm. If those things are not in order, it's going to impact.
Right. No matter which partner requires the most sex and which requires the most intimacy, right. If you don't get on the same page, you're still both not getting it. Yeah. And then other things start happening. The door creeps open for other things to happen. Some people are satisfied with just taking care of themselves and not stepping out on their partner. But there's so many things. There's so many other things that surround how much sex do we need.
Okay, I like that. So there's a lot more than just a number, right? That should be involved, especially when it comes to a relationship with that person, or even if it's a fling, right? Yeah. What if it is a fling?
Well, it depends on what kind of fling it is.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we're not gonna talk about the fling part.
I only paused because I remember a time growing up.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who a fling for her was meeting somebody at a red light and going to a hotel with them.
Okay.
That's way too dangerous. I do not promote that. That is way too. But that was probably back in the 90s or whatever. Okay. And she would ask me what I thought about it, and I think you're nuts.
Okay.
For somebody else, a fling could be
going to the club.
Going to the club. Right. But when is it a fling or is it a one night stand?
Oh, one night stand.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So, but even the one night stand can be factored in how many times you need a month.
Correct.
A fling can be factored in. You know what?
And sometimes I think sometimes too with those one night stand or even fling, you can end up building connection. Where all of this conversation about how much may factor.
I'm sitting here thinking that we're gonna have to circle back to this because now I think Dorinda and I need to do a study on how much is too much sex because I just feel like that is gonna fluctuate so differently. Especially look how things.
We want to hear from everybody, right? Like what their perspective is.
Look how things change today. Like it used to be a time where the man was, my grandmother called them men whores, whoremongers,
right?
But now women have changed the game.
Yes.
And, they have a higher sex drive now. More women are. Because sexuality is something that can easily be talked about more today than some other times. So now you have women and, and now we have other people, the people in the LGBTQ community who, they may require a different amount of sex. So, and then what is sex? What's considered sex?
Yes.
Yeah,
what is sex?
What is considered
because
sex?
There are, like you said, the LGBTQIA plus community where people don't care about sex, right? It's all about that intimacy part, right? And being able to understand the language that your partner is also saying or speaking so that you can understand their needs and not just what your number is when it comes to the relationship or situationship.
Right. And then but you also have to think about when I say what people consider sex,
Okay.
I don't know if you remember. There was I'm a big Law and Order fanatic. So there was
Crime junkie.
a Law and Order, and it was about these young girls, and they was getting they contracted STD, but it was from oral sex.
Okay.
Because oral sex wasn't considered sex.
Okay.
So when we're talking about how much is too much sex, are we including the sex mean the act, or does sex include the finishing, the orgasm? Or is it oral sex, or is it, like,
I think in a man's mind, and please, men, correct me if I'm
straighten us out.
Right.
Straighten
I think it's
us out.
from a man's mind, and this, topic came from a man, is that they're talking about the finish point.
The finish point.
Yeah, I don't think a man really cares about, not finishing. Their goal is always being able to relieve themselves, because that's how they maintain or gain clarity in that space.
Oh, that just brought us. So, but we like to finish too.
Of course.
But sometimes when they finish first, we don't get finished.
Well, I think that goes back. And I think that goes back to the communication piece, right? Are you communicating what your needs are in the relationship, not just in, around the house, but in the bedroom as well, right? If you are allowing this person to meet their sexual needs and desire, and you're not meeting yours, getting to that escalation point that you need to, then you need to communicate that to that person. Hey, I need this to be able to fulfill my need and desire when we're in this space. There's nothing wrong with being honest in those aspects.
But my mind went back to when you was talking about, and it was just a brief little snippet where you were talking about, we're talking about finishing, and we're talking about the mindset.
Yeah.
And sometimes the physical act, you mentioned finances, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned all parts of life. Yeah. What if his goal is to finish, but we haven't finished talking about our financial difficulties. We haven't finished talking about so sometimes your partner might just be ready for you to finish,
right? Because
we still have some stuff we need to resolve.
Right.
So when you mentioned that about the different aspects that affect our sexual desires and stuff, like sometimes I can't speak for other women, but I can speak for me. If me and my significant other, my husband, have other stuff on our plate and sex is all that's on his mind, I can give him that and allow him to finish and not me to finish, because I got other stuff I want to finish.
Right. Okay.
So if you need this so that you can be mentally clear, I'm going to let you have that. But once you get mentally clear, I need you to sit down and have a conversation with me about these things while I didn't finish.
And a lot of times, a mature man is likely going to do that. Once they have that clarity, they're going to sit with you and do that, right? But my thing is, why do we have to get to that point for you to be able to hear what my needs are, right? I'm not holding you from getting your needs, so don't hold me from getting my needs being met in the relationship, right? So I think it's important as partners that the one person don't always assume that they must maintain mental clarity before they can give it to the other person all the time. I understand that sometimes that may be the case where you may present yourself in that manner for your husband to be able to gain that clarity, right? But it should not be a pattern or a habit, because now I'm putting aside my needs all the time so you can get your clarity in order for me to gain mine. That means I'm always second.
Right.
And that should be some consideration around that.
Absolutely. Man, this topic went by fast, and we still have so many other.
I know, right?
We are going to have to circle back to this.
We will.
We'll do our own research, but But it was fun.
Yes, it definitely was fun, and I wanted to thank you so much for coming through and being able to expand on this topic with me. I know we're going to continue talking some more. So if we have some more juicy recordings that I'm going to shoot out, we might shoot out later on. But again, thank you for tuning in to the Human Narratives. This is your girl, Dorinda, and I'm so glad that you had the opportunity to join us. Please leave your comments, topics, or whatever you have to say about this discussion. How much is too much sex? It varies from relationship to relationship. But like we discussed, communication and being able to understand where the person is coming from, not just from your perspective, is going to be key in building that connection, especially during sex. Because it's not just about how many times. Can you really feel the other person's soul when you're in that space with them, right? Can you connect and make that moment special, right? Sex is not just physical. It's more to it. The soul connection. That's the beautiful part. But thank you, my girl, for showing and always being present. I love you. And thank you guys for tuning in. Take care until we see you again. Bye.